The hills of West Virginia are filled with all manner of ghosts and spirits. While most are harmless specters, some are very, very vengeful. This story comes from Ruth and Musick's Telltale Lilac Bush and other West Virginia ghost tales. It is the 26th story titled The Gate. Originally told by Ray Tatterson in 1959. Like in my other videos, first I will retell the story. Then we will look into the folklore and history that may have inspired this tale. Across from a cemetery on Bunner's Ridge in Marion County, West Virginia, was a large house a man named Bert had built for himself and his wife as a wedding gift. During the second year of their marriage, Bert became very ill with a fever. Folks from the community, certain that Bert would soon pass away from his illness, went ahead and dug a grave for Bert and his wife. But Bert didn't die. He actually started recovering from his illness. One night, as a neighbor who had come to check in on Bert and his wife was leaving, they claimed they heard shuffling and footsteps coming from just beyond the cemetery gate. As time would pass, Bert recovered more and more, and as he did, the sounds at night got worse, louder, more violent. Frightened by this, the woman went to a local indigenous mountain doctor who told her it was the angel of death, angry due to the unfilled grave. Neighbors tried filling in the grave, but when night fell, the noises and the shaking of the cemetery gate only became louder and more violent. The doctor came to the cemetery and blessed the area around the gate to try and keep the vengeful spirit contained. After many nights of worsening thrashing against the gate, the wife decided it would be best to have Bert moved to a hospital in Morgantown. The next evening, an ambulance came to get Bert, and as night fell, the wife laid awake in bed and realized that she hadn't heard any thrashing at the cemetery gate. Eventually, she heard a lesser shuffling noise making its way from the heart of the cemetery through the gate and starting down the road. She quickly jumped from her bed screaming and ran outside to the cemetery. The next morning, when a hearse arrived from Morgantown, the driver found Bert's wife still sitting outside the cemetery, crying, screaming that her husband was dead. When the ambulance had come to get Bert, they had to open the cemetery gate to turn around the ambulance, and they had forgotten to close it. The angel of death had finally escaped and caught up with Bert. Growing up, this was a story that terrified me the most and stuck with me after reading Telltale Lilac Bush for the first time. There are several accounts in West Virginia folklore that involve gates and fences being able to contain supernatural entities. In one account, a white figure would appear beyond a cemetery gate and stare at a woman as she drove by until she eventually died. After she was eventually buried at the cemetery where the white figure had been seen, it was never seen again by any other passerbys. In another instance, a figure would cross the street from a churchyard cemetery, pass through the walls of a house, and take clothing from the house before disappearing back to the churchyard. Eventually, the person who lived in the house passed away and was buried in the same cemetery, and the figure was never seen again. It is even a common practice to place a small fence around the graves of those who die at a very young age, so that their little souls can't wander off and get lost in the hills and forests of Appalachia. West Virginia is also home to several legends and myths of harbingers of doom. Most common of these are probably the stories of the banshees. These tales were undoubtedly brought over by Irish immigrants in the very early days of the United States. In Irish lore, banshees are more like fairies than the rag-covered hags most would associate with the creatures today. Their crying and screams in the night would often mean someone in the area was soon going to pass away. If a banshee was seen washing bloody clothing or armor or even weapons, this meant someone in the area was soon going to face a particularly violent death. Some families, typically the extremely rich and fortunate, at least financially or socially, would have their own family banshees. Many would avoid marrying into these families for very obvious reasons, of course. It would seem when these stories came to the Americas, they would blend with the Germanic and English ideas of hags to create something entirely new. For those who are unaware, hags are typically old witches that cause all manner of curses and hexes. A lot of what we now think of as witch stories probably originated as old hag tales, again in England, Scotland, and Germany. They were able to fly around on household objects, they would kidnap and eat children, and would even go as far as causing nightmares by setting on people's chests as they attempted to sleep. Again, this is all classic sleep paralysis hag behavior. As these stories would blend, American banshees would become less fairy-like and more hag-like. Old and frail-looking, often covered in rags. But their screams and cries were still a sign associated with misfortune and death. Another West Virginia creature often associated with misfortune and death is that of the Mothman. In 1966 and 1967, dozens, if not hundreds of people reported seeing a large winged creature in and around the area of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. While it never directly attacked anyone except for possibly a dog, it did seem to cause a lot of paranormal activity in the area. That was until December 15th, 1967, when the Silver Bridge, a bridge that spanned the Ohio River connecting Point Pleasant to Ohio, collapsed, killing 46 people. Since then, Mothman sightings have been reported around the United States and the world, often connected to disasters. While most of these reports don't come out until months and even years after these disasters, it's still interesting to see how winged creatures or angels of death are still associated with death and misfortune, and their stories continue even to this day. I'm always fascinated to see how folklore continues to evolve and elements are mixed together to create entirely new creatures and ghost stories. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I hope to talk to you again very, very soon.